Thank you for coming back, I should say. Some students have asked me to do a video on sequencing in instructional design. If you're doing instructional design and you have to sequence your content, in what order should the content come? And so we call this sequencing. I have other names for it. Sometimes I call it modularizing or packaging. All it really means is that you have to take your content and place your content into lessons or modules. And you have to decide in which order will it be presented, which will come first. This is a part of instructional design. You want to know where to start and you want to know where to end. Let us suppose you're teaching your students about mangoes, oranges, sapodillas, any kind of fruit like that. You're teaching the fruits of Trinidad and Tobago. Or maybe you're teaching the fruits of Canada. Obviously, if you're in Canada, the first fruit you will teach them about would be apples. Because I think apples are the most common fruit in Canada. And mangoes probably are the least common. I could remember giving one of my lecturers a mango when I used to go to school in the US. And it was the first time she ever tasted a mango. And she told me after that she went driving all over Michigan looking for mangoes. It was so enjoyable. But mangoes was a strange fruit to her. So if you're teaching about fruits and you're living in the US or Canada, you would want to start with the known fruits and then move to the unknown fruits. If you're in Trinidad or the Caribbean, you might want to start with a common fruit such like mango in Trinidad and Tobago. And then you move to the uncommon fruits. So one way to order your content is to move from the known to the unknown. What the student already knows, you teach them that first. And then after that, you teach them what they don't know. Let us suppose you're teaching your students maybe shapes, square, rectangle, triangle, circle. Which one would you teach first? Well, they may not know any of them, but probably the most common shape is a circle. And after that, the next most common shape might be a square. So you can move from the known to the unknown. But you can also move from the least difficult to the most difficult. So the least difficult shape to understand is square, because a square is just equal sides and equal angles. There's nothing fancy about a square. So it's the least difficult shape to understand. And you can go to the most complicated shape. So maybe a square, then you teach rectangle, then you teach triangle, and then you teach circle. You might disagree with me, but if you are the designer, you will have to make the decision which one you should teach first and which one you should teach second. And that's called the difficulty approach. You're teaching your content based upon ease. In other words, which one is easier to learn, and you're moving to which one is hardest to learn. Thirdly, you can also teach your students based upon familiarity. Which one are they familiar with? Which one do they see in their neighborhood? If you're teaching your students about dogs, the most common dog might be the mongrel. And then you go to the uncommon dogs. Those are they not familiar with. So you can also sequence your content based upon familiarity. Let us suppose you're teaching them the operators and you're teaching them arithmetic. You got to teach them to subtract, to add, to multiply, and divide. Everybody knows that you teach addition first. Why? Because addition is simpler than subtraction, which is simpler than multiplication, which is simpler than division. And of course, after division, then you have like exponentiation and so on, like raising something to a certain power, and that's very difficult for people to understand. So you move from the less difficult to the most difficult. So students, when you are sequencing your content, look for the things that are easy to do first and teach that. And then you look for the things that are next in line in terms of difficulty. So here we have covered what? We have covered the known to the unknown. We have covered the familiar to the unfamiliar. We've covered the simple to the difficult. What about logical prerequisites? When you think of something that is logical, we are thinking about something that common sense would tell you this should come before that. This should come before this. So if you're teaching someone to drive a car, for instance, okay, which seems logical that you should teach the student? Well, when I'm teaching people to drive, from the moment they sit down in my car, you know what I tell them? This is the brakes. Yeah, I don't want them to kill me. So if it's a matter of anything, learn to mash your brakes. Then I might teach them to steer the car. So you see, logically. So we're using logical prerequisites. We're not using difficulty because there is no difference in difficulty in terms of mashing the brakes or steering the car. Probably mashing the brakes is simpler, but you know. But we could use logical prerequisites because that comes before the other one. And think of if you're teaching them concepts. Suppose you're teaching them about furniture and you've got to teach them about tables and desks and legs and wood and tabletop and square. Which would you teach first? Well, of course, if I am to understand what a piece of furniture is, I must understand what a table is and what a desk is and such things. So obviously, understanding desk and table is a conceptual prerequisite, meaning I must first understand the concept table. I must then understand the concept desk, whichever one I want to understand first, and then I'll be better able to understand the concept of furniture. But if I'm to understand the concept table, I need to understand the concept legs. And if I have to understand legs, I must understand the concept wood. So it may seem a conceptual order to follow that we teach